A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
While news outlets around the world cover the ongoing drama of the war in Iran, there is another silent war unfolding that few are even talking about. This is despite the fact that it spans much of the Eurasian continent and is centered around two of the world's greatest powers, Russia and China. But we ignore this growing conflict at our collective peril, as it's no exaggeration to say the future of global trade is at stake. Across Eurasia today, there are several major infrastructure projects, either proposed, under construction, or completed, that tell a hugely consequential story about the relationship between two of the most powerful nations on Earth. They are the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route and the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, the International North-South Transport Corridor, and the still-hypothetical but very much seriously discussed über-megaproject of the Eurasia Canal. Generally speaking, when it comes to the global stage, Russia and China are two major players who are allies. In fact, their strategic partnership has strengthened in the last decade. A recent analysis by the Council on Foreign Relations describes growing military ties, complementary economies, and increased diplomatic cooperation between the two nations. But the truth is that the relationship between China and Russia is far more complicated than mere allies or enemies. And there's probably no more outstanding example of the flip side of that complexity than the increasing tensions over who gets to control Eurasian connectivity. This is an extraordinarily valuable thing to control, and as we'll see, some impressive investments and remarkable pieces of infrastructure have been produced in the fight over that control. In this special episode of Looking For, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the 4 megaprojects in question. We will not only marvel at the engineering and tech specs, but we'll also place these massive developments in context, to try to understand both how Russia and China got to such a fever pitch of overt competition, and also how this pivotal moment might shape the future of Europe, Asia, and the architecture of global trade itself. Join us as we study and unravel one of the most important phenomena on the world stage today, the growing trade war between Russia and China. But before we show you the new routes under construction, let me introduce you to Merlin AI, an all-in-one AI tool. They're giving our audience an exclusive 75% discount, and we'll show you exactly how to claim it at the end. For videos like this, our research is scattered. Articles, PDFs, notes, multiple AI tools, and since each tool is good at something, subscribing to all of them gets expensive. Merlin puts all top LLM from ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and more under one subscription, so you pick the best model for each task without paying for each separately. The project's feature works as a personal research hub. Drop in your links, PDFs, and notes, then ask questions across all of it at once. Need something deeper? Turn on Deep Research and get a structured report pulled from multiple sources. There's also image and video generation, all without switching tabs. On price, ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini are each around $20 a month, and that adds up fast. Merlin is cheaper because they buy API access in bulk, and most people never use $20 worth of credits anyway. To get the deal, hit the pricing page, go to Stripe checkout, apply the promo code to the annual plan, and it will drop to $60 for the year, about $5 a month. This link is in the description and pinned comment. We don't know how long it lasts, so grab it while you can. Now, back to the Russia-China trade war. For centuries, we've lived in a world of maritime trade, and we still do today. 80% of international trade volume travels by sea, but overland trade routes have always been, and still are, hugely important and powerful. One reason is that they are faster. For example, freight traveling from Asia to Europe by sea through the Suez Canal can take 30 to 45 days, but the same distance by rail takes only 12 to 18 days. While air travel is even faster, it's also the most expensive shipping method in widespread use, which illustrates another advantage of overland travel: cost. While maritime shipping remains the most cost-effective overall, the cost of shipping by rail is closer to that of maritime than it is to the relatively exorbitant cost of air travel. It balances speed and cost in a way that remains unique. Overland trade routes also provide diversification, a crucial component of future resilience in a world facing growing disruptions and instability.
For the first time in history, Iranian officials say the country has closed the Strait of Hormuz following joint strikes from the U.S. and Israel.
The World Economic Forum estimates that alternative trade corridors could boost global GDP by 3% by 2030, provided, that is, that strategic international partnerships are successfully maintained. It goes somewhat without saying that overland trade has played a massive role in numerous empires and in shaping the world as we know it today. From the Mongolian Empire to the Silk Road to the advent of modern railways, wealth and influence have corresponded in no small way with overland trade. As public affairs and policy expert Darren Spink writes, quote, "History reminds us that power ultimately follows the movement of goods, capital, and people. History also often hinges on those moments when power gets rebalanced or restructured, and there are few larger moments of power disruption in modern history than the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the onset of the post-Cold War era. What had once been a massive single empire in the Soviet Union instead fragmented into 15 independent states. What had been Soviet-controlled trade routes through Central Asia thus became a series of international borders. Most significantly impacted was the historic Trans-Siberian Railway, which, until 1991, had put Moscow in control of all overland routes across Eurasia's northern tier. The loss of sole control over this invaluable route set the stage for the trade route competition we're witnessing today. Russia continued to experience economic woes that stemmed back to the 1980s, thanks in large part to falling oil prices, and saw state capacity deteriorate in the 1990s. Meanwhile, China experienced significant economic growth during the same period. In short, Russia was too weak to dominate its former periphery, while China was, at the time, too cautious to openly challenge it. This created what analysts have called a division of labor in Central Asia. An uneasy balance emerged between the two nations, with Russia acting as security provider and China acting as economic investor. This worked, if imperfectly, and held for about 2 decades following the collapse of the Soviet Union. But in 2013, that all changed. On September 7, 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced China's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive new global infrastructure and connectivity strategy aimed at securing trade routes, exporting industrial overcapacity, expanding geopolitical influence, and, most relevant of all, building land corridors across the former Soviet sphere. In essence, this groundbreaking announcement signaled a shift in that uneasy balance that had existed for 2 decades between China and Russia. Initially, Russian leadership welcomed the Belt and Road Initiative, at least rhetorically. In public diplomatic terms, it was framed by both sides as a kind of win-win strategy that would involve cooperation and mutual development. But over the next decade, it became increasingly clear that China was gaining economic influence in Central Asia and shifting regional power dynamics away from Russia. There's perhaps no infrastructure project more emblematic of this shift than the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, also called simply the Middle Corridor, that begins at Liangyungang Port on the edge of the Yellow Sea, traveling a total multimodal distance of about 11,000 kilometers. The route runs all the way across China from east to west, then through Kazakhstan to arrive at the Caspian Sea. Train ferries facilitate the crossing of the Caspian to arrive in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and, by extension, the rest of Europe. Noticeably, it bypasses Russia entirely. It's also, as luck would have it, the shortest route between Western China and Europe, geographically speaking. This makes it hugely threatening to Russia's control over Eurasian trade routes. But, until quite recently, it has mostly gone underused. There's been no shortage of obstacles when it comes to the Middle Corridor reaching its true potential. A leading expert in American national security and foreign policy, and former Vice President for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation, James J. Carafano, explains in an article for Geopolitical Intelligence Services, quote, "The post-Soviet space's many issues bedeviled cooperation, including the ongoing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the occupation of Georgian territory by Russia, and the collapse of the government in Afghanistan after the hasty US withdrawal. Also, the continued antagonism of the West with Russia, China, and Iran led to the long-held perception of the area as featuring elevated strategic risk and uncertainty. However, this all changed rather dramatically when the Russo-Ukrainian War began.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says enemy sabotage groups have entered Kyiv and that he is target number one.
New satellite imagery just in tonight appears to show hundreds of Russian military vehicles in a convoy heading towards Kyiv.
Many scholars, governments, and security analysts today describe the war as having begun in February 2014 with the Russian annexation of Crimea, and regard the 2022 invasion of Ukraine as a major escalation. And if the impact on Eurasian trade is any indication, 2014 was indeed the turning point. The reason, in a word, is sanctions. Following Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, the US, Canada, the EU, and various international organizations all imposed sanctions targeting both Russian businesses and individuals. Many Central Asian states were economically tied with Russia, but the sanctions made diversification strategies abruptly more important. And therefore, the Middle Corridor suddenly became far more appealing, particularly for the Central Asian states it runs through. In the immediate aftermath, however, this major shift was mostly a shift in mindset. No drastic boom came to the Middle Corridor just yet, even though China had already announced its Belt and Road Initiative. Then, in November 2014, the president of Kazakhstan gave an unexpected address to the nation, and by extension, the world, announcing a $9 billion stimulus plan to modernize Kazakhstan's roads, ports, railways, and infrastructure. The program was called Nurli Zol, which translates from the original Kazakh to mean bright path. Although the announcement came as a surprise, it likely stemmed from an existing trajectory. In other words, the Russian sanctions simply reinforced the need for Kazakhstan's pre-existing infrastructure plan. However, since the start of the Russo-Ukrainian War, it marked the first major announcement from a Central Asian country openly declaring the intent to diversify its trade route infrastructure, and it would be far from the last. Azerbaijan had already been constructing a new port at Eilat in the capital city of Baku since 2010. But after 2014, the importance of this new port suddenly grew exponentially. One major reason is that the completion of this new port in Baku, in tandem with Kazakhstan's upgrading of its port in Aktau, would thus form Point A and Point B in a viable new trade path across the Caspian Sea. In October 2017, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey officially opened the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway, running from the new port in Baku through all three countries to arrive in the Turkish city of Kars. Just a few months later, Azerbaijan announced it had completed its new port in Baku, and thus the path outside of Russia connecting China and Central Asia to Europe grew longer still, now stretching from the east of the Caspian all the way into the fabled nation bringing east and west, Turkey. But the biggest missing piece of the Middle Corridor puzzle was still lurking in the background. A massive project that had been discussed for decades, yet had never witnessed the geopolitical opportunity to see the light. That would all change dramatically in 2022. In 2022, the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War witnessed what analysts today call a major escalation. Russia, which had been amassing troops near the Ukrainian border since late 2021, launched an invasion in February 2022.
Explosions rocking several cities, including the capital of Kyiv.
The Western sanctions, which had already been in effect, paled in comparison to the sanctions that were now swiftly leveled. Russia became de facto isolated from Western markets following the invasion. Therefore, surrounding countries that were already warming to the idea of diversifying in order to avoid the risk of relying on Russia now found themselves practically sweating from the heat. And now, in this novel geopolitical situation, an old and very bold idea soon became unusually attractive. Build a railroad, not just connecting one part of Central Asia to another, but connecting China itself with the already growing Middle Corridor, and potentially completing what could then be an entire new alternative to the Trans-Siberian Railway that bypasses Russia altogether. The China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, or CKU Railway for short, was first proposed all the way back in the early 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. But for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the extraordinary expense involved in carving, and indeed tunneling extensively, a path through the heavily mountainous nation of Kyrgyzstan, the moment for this radical idea simply never came. But in September 2022, China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan all signed an agreement to conduct a feasibility study of the project. A huge, unprecedented step toward the possibility that it could, at long last, actually come to life. Then, in June 2024, a trilateral summit was held in Beijing, during which a final agreement was signed to begin construction. What the three countries are taking on with the CKU Railway is nothing short of colossal. The route is approximately 532.53 kilometers in length. Along that path, it will include no less than 3 very large tunnels, all of them located in the mountainous terrain of Kyrgyzstan. The 12.5-kilometer Narin Tunnel will pass through the Jaman-Davan Pass. The 13.2-kilometer Koshtaba Tunnel will pass through the village of Kazarman. And the 12.2-kilometer Fergana Mountain Tunnel will, as the name implies, burrow its way through the core of the Fergana Range in the Tian Shan. The Tian Shan is a dramatic mountain range in Central Asia and one of the more ambitious places to try to build a railway that could be found anywhere on Earth. The tallest peak of the range is a whopping 7,439 meters on the snow-coated summit of Zhengiz Chakusu, while the lowest point is in the Turpan Depression, more than 150 meters below sea level. Construction on this audacious project officially began in 2025, with a projected completion date sometime in 2029. That same year, China signed a 35-year loan agreement to finance roughly half the project, which is expected to cost roughly $4.7 billion in total. But while this is perhaps the most dramatic and most current facet of the growing trade war between Russia and China, it's far from the only battlefield involved. Russia is also competing to retain its transportational importance and making big moves in the process.
Russia is naturally looking elsewhere to do business. That's where a new trade route with India comes in, with both countries hoping to speed up bilateral trade.
Take, for example, the International North-South Transport Corridor. This project, like others we've discussed, has actually been underway for some time. In fact, the initial agreement was signed between participating countries all the way back in 2002. But again, like other projects, recent developments have made its importance suddenly skyrocket in the last few years. For Russia, the project offers the chance of a huge reduction in distance between itself and India. The traditional trade route from Russia to India travels west through northern Europe, back down and then across the Mediterranean Sea, and then through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea before crossing the Arabian Sea to reach India's western coast. The International North-South Transport Corridor, or INSTC for short, offers a remarkably more straightforward path, down from St. Petersburg through Azerbaijan, across Iran, and through a narrower portion of the Arabian Sea directly to Mumbai. The route is a whopping 7,200 kilometers, but that's a walk in the park compared to the roughly 17,000 kilometers it currently takes to go around and down continental Europe on the traditional route. Dry runs were conducted in 2014 to test for bottlenecks, and the results indicated that the INSTC route could reduce shipping costs by $2,500 for every 15 tons of cargo. In other words, a 30% reduction in cost, not to mention a shocking 40% reduction in transit times. That's such an increase in speed, it's a little like every country in the EU suddenly raising the freeway speed limit to 200 kilometers per hour. On July 7, 2022, Russia's state-owned railway company RZD Logistics announced the first transport of goods to India along the International North-South Transport Corridor. This was a major milestone, marking the beginning of commercial use. But the truth is that the corridor still remains only partially completed. Two major branches in particular are still under construction, meaning the corridor is functionally in use, especially on the eastern branch, but it does not yet have full end-to-end integration. And, as fate would have it, the two major branches still under construction involve Iran. One is a 162-kilometer rail segment linking northern Iran with Azerbaijan and the Caspian, which is called the Rasht-Astara Railway. Russia and Iran signed an executory contract for its construction back in 2023, and Iran set a 4-year deadline to complete it. The other major missing link is the Chabahar-Zahedan line, which will connect Iran's Chabahar port in the south with its own city of Zahedan. approximately 630 kilometers to the north, thus connecting with Iran's existing rail network. This is key for Indian access to the corridor, but it currently remains under construction. There are other bits and pieces still in the works here and there, as well as some bold proposals, including a Great Canal of Persia, or, by its more technical name, the Iran-Rud Trans-Iranian Canal. This is a long-standing proposal, which still remains merely a proposal today, to build a canal all the way from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, or alternatively the Gulf of Oman. This, if ever realized, would be one of the longest canals ever constructed, and by far the longest continuous engineered sea-to-sea canal, at a distance of about 1,400 to 1,600 kilometers, depending on the route chosen. Consensus seems to be, however, that this remains a somewhat distant dream. And of course, the elephant in the room. On February the 28th, 2026, the US and Israel launched a joint attack on Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and igniting a war. As you might expect, this has created significant disruptions in Eurasian trade, particularly along the INSTC. Cargo transportation along the corridor has been largely suspended since the war began. Some railroad border crossings have also been closed, for example, the Iran-Azerbaijan border. Analysts are warning that the disruption could increase logistics costs by 20 to 30%, and as much as double delivery times as cargo is forced to be rerouted. The Strait of Hormuz has also effectively been closed since mid-March, arguably the largest disruption in the history of the global oil market and one of the largest to the energy supply. This, not unlike the Russo-Ukraine war, forces Central Asia and partners to develop alternatives that bypass Iran. There is frankly no telling how the war will progress or what the ultimate impact on the INSTC, not to mention the people in the region, will be. Russia, alongside Kazakhstan, is also pondering a comparatively audacious project. One that also starts at the Caspian Sea, but instead digs a canal 700 kilometers west to the Black Sea. This proposed megaproject is known simply as the Eurasia Canal. A paper by researchers Nareli Bekturganov and Arasha Belev estimates that the canal, if built, would create 200,000 jobs across Kazakhstan, southern Russia, and other countries surrounding the Caspian region. The project was first proposed by then-President of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, back in 2007. At the time, it was estimated that the project would take 10 years to complete and cost $6 billion. Probable estimates have also put the dimensions of the canal at 110 meters wide and 6.5 meters deep, designed for vessels with a 10,000-ton carrying capacity, which would bring up 75 million tons of cargo each year. As bold as it is, the proposed project has some practical basis. It would pass entirely through southern Russia, along a geologic lowland called the Kumamanic Depression, and offer, despite its size, a shorter alternative to the current shipping route that relies on the outdated Volga-Don shipping canal. At just 101 kilometers, the older canal is itself far shorter than the proposed Eurasia Canal. But in order to pass through it, ships have to first travel hundreds of kilometers north before heading southwest. The Volga-Don Canal also has a total of 13 locks, which tend to be major bottlenecks where ships queue up behind each other. The canal also has stricter size limits, which means more trips for the same amount of cargo. On the other hand, the Eurasia Canal, if built, would likely have significantly fewer locks, possibly even half as many. This is thanks in large part to its hypothetical position along a natural lowland with minimal elevation changes. For the same reason, the Eurasia Canal could run straight westward, meaning that, even though it would be 7 times the length of the Volga-Don, the total shipping route would be something like 300 kilometers shorter. Instead of meandering through the roughly 1,000-kilometer current route that utilizes the Volga-Don, ships could just flow straight through the 700-kilometer new canal from the Caspian right to the Black Sea. The scale of this escalating situation is such that it's virtually impossible to predict what will happen. Part of the reason is because it involves such a vast swathe of the world's nations and territory. Between multiple massive ongoing wars and an increasingly uncertain geopolitical climate, few videos on this channel have offered a more opaque window into the future, despite the vast importance of the drama that's unfolding. The simple fact is this: when it comes to the phenomenon of international dependence on Russian trade routes, Russia and China currently have opposing incentives. China is focused on regime stability, as well as having control over its own trade exits as the world's manufacturing center. Russia, meanwhile, is facing the loss of its former geographic indispensability. It would surely be hyperbolic to call this an outright existential threat to Russia, but not by as much as you might think. What both countries share is a desire to minimize risk rather than maximize efficiency. This is, alas, what great power competition appears to look like in the modern era. In a word, deglobalization. What happens next is frankly anybody's guess. But we hope to have illustrated the fact that, if you want to find out, you better keep a close eye on the growing trade route war between Russia and China. If you want to discover other trading routes currently under construction, I'll let you check out my other episode on the corridors in Thailand, Iraq, and India. And please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. That's all for now. We'll see you next time on Looking For.